am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Keith James, General Manager at Thomson Reuters for large firms business for tax professionals. Keith has over 20 years of experience working in senior leadership positions at leading software and content organizations. Previously, he served as the CEO of Access Data, and he has also held several leadership positions at LexisNexis. Keith graduated from Ohio University with a BA in history, received his Juris Doctorate from University of Dayton School of Law. During my interview with Keith, he shares his story on how he changed his personal operating system of moving incrementally because of his need to achieve at a high level to one of moving faster and at scale. Learn the mindset practices he has put into place that may help you shift your own mental clarity and emotional strength as well. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And today I'm with Keith James from Thomson Reuters. Keith, do you want to just give us a little background on yourself before we get started?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amy. I appreciate it. As you said, I work for Thomson Reuters, and essentially what I do is I lead the group that focuses on serving large tax and accounting firms. And, really our purpose as a group is to enable our customers to be trusted advisors to their clients in a world that we know is constantly changing.
Yes.
So more specifically, the role is helping firms continue to drive their efforts to transform. And then also helping our clients get value out of the services that they have with us.
Yeah. And I know roles like this are extremely important in times like this, when people are switching their technology, switching their practices and what they need to do in order to thrive and maintain what they've got going besides even growing at this point. But maybe you can give us a little background on yourself, like where did you come from and what were your beginnings that maybe led you to eventually doing a role like this?
Yeah, lots of twists and turns, but there are some themes here that I think that we could use as a foundation for our time today. So I really am educated as a lawyer, but I made the decision early on not to practice law. What I enjoyed most was research and technology together. So this is back in the 90s.
Okay.
And it was still thrilling to be able to do all of your work right from your, in this case, like really bad dorm room and not have to go to the library. At the time, being an expert in that, I think many people will remember, that was actually a competitive advantage. And so I started working in legal technology. And in the legal space, similar to our space now, technology advanced and disrupted business models. And so I became interested then in business transformation and all of the mindsets and technology that go into that. And that question of how to thrive when business models are being disruptive in the business transformation is what I became really passionate about. So I joined Thomson Reuters about 3 years ago to focus on this very question for tax and accounting space. I'd say I found an industry at a really interesting moment where the complexity and the speed of change has crossed that threshold where you got to respond to the unknown. Gone are the days of multi-year planning. And so now I'm really passionate about business agility, how to help our customers and our company be more quick to respond versus reacting to change. And so this is all about mindsets, process, and technology and where they intersect. And so there's a lot of inner work that you need to do to make this happen. And I'm happy to share more detail on that with you today. But essentially, that's kind of the path that led me to where I am today.
So let's go back a little just so that we can understand. So why did you want to be an attorney in the first place?
Yeah. So the idea of advocacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this notion of the way our legal system works, right? And the idea that look, there is a process to get to sort of the right answer,
Mm-hmm.
and that process was interesting to me. The ideals around it, right, were very interesting to me. And then just sort of as a person, I maybe had sort of not informed ideas of what it was like to be a lawyer, but I do really like presenting and advocating.
Right.
I've found an outlet in that in other ways as I grew up kind of in a sales career. But that kind of notion of, you're doing research, you're advocating, I thought you were presenting. I mean, my first couple jobs were more like reviewing contracts in a cubicle and comparing
Right. Yeah.
different things, which which is great, and that's important to be able to have the attention to detail. But at the time, I thought, the technology and the research is something that I'd love to talk about and do all day long.
So were there people in your family that were attorneys, or was there someone that came to school that you were like, oh, that was inspiring? Like, what would even have gotten you down that path of?
Well, of course, LA Law, the show, of course.
Yeah.
In the 90s, right? So that, of course, the suits alone on that show. But but no, I had the chance to work, in a law firm before I was a lawyer. And, this was back when everything was manual. And sort of the job was to like take all the documents to the court and make sure they got filed. And so I got to know a lot of lawyers that way. And, that first professional job where, you don't have that background and you're dealing with these highly educated people and you're getting to know a little bit about the clients and the cases, and the notion of how important it is to be part of the process, to follow the process. And the type of firm this was kind of servicing. It was like a small firm that did family law and sort of had small clients, and these were really important moments for those clients, and just kind of seeing the impact, positive and negative, that this had. I saw how high stakes it was, and so that was of interest to me. But then when you get into it and the problems and questions you're working on, these are real people, real life things. And I got more interested in how to help the profession, how to bring technology access, right? That became very interesting to me, at least in the law side of this, access to the law. And when you think about what technology does, gives people more ability to understand what the law might mean.
So what was the technology that got you started seeing that it could enable that?
Yeah, so it's really the research technology, right? So at Thomson Reuters, it's the product called Westlaw, right? It's the ability to go and run a query on what does the law say on whatever topic, right? And that.
But I'm sure when you started, it was all the books, right? Like in the firm, and then they come in and replace the papers.
Well, they did have, right, Westlaw and these kind of products, but you would like have to go to this certain room, and it was like shh, because it was like like really like hard to do, and it was like you had to be really careful. The technology was at a different place, and so definitely there were books, but it was at that time where in school they were teaching you as a young attorney to use these technologies, because the idea was they were going to be much more part of how people worked. And so I gravitated towards that and thought that was really interesting, to like, wow, I can get the answer. It's right in front of me. It's right here.
Yeah, I think that's what's so important about getting that experience while you're a student, because when you get out of school, you're kind of stuck in a role. When you're a student, you can kind of see the inner workings and decide where your passion is.
Yeah, and you have I had such little life experience, and you, as many people do, you make decisions based on a handful of experiences and people that you meet, but it takes you on this interesting path, right? And when you think about the essence of who you are, I still love research. I still research all the time. I do it in different ways now. I love public speaking. I'm all about how can I help give people access to these are common themes. So no matter what, I probably would have found those combinations anywhere else. And I worked in the legal space for quite a long time. And I was really interested to come to tax and accounting, which is quite different, but has a lot of similarities too. And so, this is where I am at this point in the journey. So.
Yeah. Did you find once you started your career, you had some ideals that are, even habits or patterns that you were kind of going into what you thought was the way you were going to go about work, or the way you were going to go about your personal life? And slowly those started breaking down as you started going through your journey.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting time for you to ask me this question, because I'd say for the last 2 years, year and a half, I've been really upgrading, my personal operating system, right? We talked a bit about transformation.
Right.
And all of the things that got me, to the place are things that won't serve me or my organization or my family and friends in this really disrupted world, right? All of the things that the habits and patterns, and I can give more specificity, but they were really about how to incrementally fit in with incremental changes. Like if you get on a track and you do these certain things and you get promoted, right? Or you help certain clients and they stay with you and they keep moving on the journey with you. This whole notion of kind of fit in, stability, continuity. But if you really examine it, it's kind of based on fear. And kind of based on this notion of, hey, let's play not to lose, because the world is a stable place. And I've come to know all those things I was doing, while they were effective, probably not going to work in the world where we don't know what's coming on Wednesday. And so I would contrast that with a new operating system that's all about playing to win or creating something new. And it's this internal operating system that's all about that. And in a minute, I'll get into a much more level of specificity around what I mean by that, what the dimensions are. But at the highest level, that's an important and huge shift, right? And if you think about it, that first operating system of fitting in, right? It's very much like a teenager, right? You're either the smartest person in the room, you're either the doer, who gets everything done, or you're popular, right? Or if you have a big ego like I did or do, you're all three. You're lying, right? Versus
but what drove you to want to fit it? So let's just pause on that. So before we move on, is what kind of things were in your life that you were driven to do these incremental changes or be very careful to fit in? Is there something that actually happened in your life that would have created that for you?
Just being on a track and being comfortable being on a track. So this notion of, I think many people would be able to relate to this that are part of your audience, who are smart, successful. It's this notion of, okay, it's the identity of, oh, I'm an achiever, I do well, right? So I work hard. That sort of was my angle versus the person who's naturally really smart, who, is always proving they're smart. I was more like, hey, I achieve things. So you get on this track and it feeds itself. There's no reason to get off of it because it's working for you. So I'd say what happened was, like, early on in life, I found this way of getting positive feedback and getting attention. Again, I said, I like to do public speaking. I like to be sort of the center of attention. I got feedback from that by achieving, right? And you do it incrementally, right? You follow steps. You, on the professional side of things, I was a liberal arts undergrad. I, learned a foreign language. I took the LSATs. I went to law school. You do all those things on a track, and you create this identity that's effective. But is it well positioned to solve today's problems? Right? Multi-year planning, probably not the way to deal with what's happened this year, right? And so having a new way of operating has been really interesting for me.
So were you modeling that from people you knew, or what was driving you to be an achiever?
I had a lot of examples in my life.
Somebody, or what was
tons of examples from, I'd say, my immediate family, right? When I think about, my sister, but I think about, my father or my mom, and sort of the way that things were set up in the family, in a very encouraging way, but everything was set up in a way where it was very easy. There was nothing in my way to doing those things. I didn't have to overcome, a certain thing to, have access to, get to work on things that maybe I wasn't good at, or so it was set up to be very easy for me to be on that track. And I tried to respect that, right? To be grateful and respect those things that are given to you, and do something with them, right? So that sense of duty, and then all the things that come along with that, right? So you have those models, you make certain friends, you have certain teachers, right? And I love to learn, right? And so you get all these mentors and these people who are encouraging you to go a little bit farther, try this, try that. So I was just surrounded by coaches.
Right.
Now I try to play more the role of a coach, but surrounded by that. I was a competitive tennis player growing up, and so I had that whole discipline of, get up at 6 a.m., do the practice, have the certain diet that you're, all of the discipline around that was, part of things that served me well to always be on this, track of achievement, which again, I don't advocate as necessarily the way to be successful in the future.
Yeah. So did something happen or occur to you that this needed to shift?
Yeah.
I mean, and when was that?
Yeah, it happened to me in between, like right before I joined Thomson Reuters. So I had, been working a long time in the legal industry, and I knew I wanted to, have a change and take a little bit of time off. And I gave myself that gift of, it wasn't that long, it was maybe like a 6-month period of time where I was working a job where it was multiple time zones, and you're like traveling all over the world, and it sounded awesome, and it like sounds cool now because we can't travel, but there was a level of exhaustion that I just inherently knew this isn't good for me. And so I took the 6 months off, and I really at that point had the chance to get time during the day to think, to connect, right, to all my friends, all people that I hadn't really been that close to over. You kind of change it, and all of a sudden you look around, it's like, what am I doing, right?
Right,
exactly. And so I had that time, and what came out of that was an energized version of myself that wanted to do the same things, but do it in a different way, like take on a huge challenge, right? Which is, how do we help an industry, right, that's at a moment of transformation? And because I like learning, and because that's kind of my first place to go is to research, right?
Right.
I did a bunch of research and found out there are all these new exciting ways of operating and running companies and helping businesses transform that are completely different from this old way. And it's sort of like this. If you think about the 20th century, it was about the factory model, right? You have this assembly line, and that came from building cars, right? Because that was the assembly line. Well, if you look at the 21st century, innovation is in technology, it's software. And the way software is built today is not an assembly line. It's built in an agile way, it's built in an iterative way. You do the smallest amount of work you can, you test, you learn. And that's how you can run companies. And it's also how you can operate your life.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I did during that time, is learn a bit about that. And then, I joined Thomson Reuters, and that was very much where the company was at the place and time. And so the timing was perfect.
Right.
And through that came a lot of inner work too. It's not just on the business side. It's like, you got to change yourself.
Yeah, because else you fall right back into that pattern.
Yeah, which I still do, right? So I haven't figured all this out. But
so what was the inner work? What did you do?
Yeah. So I referenced it earlier. It's that, idea of now it's playing to win. Now it's this sort of create the future. And what I'd say is it lives in understanding my purpose first. Like, why am I here? Which I can get into here. And then it's about adopting practices around mental clarity, emotional connectedness and being physically energized. Okay. So how do you live, to that purpose? You got to create the energy to do so. Right. And so, it's really understanding that and then putting the practices in place. Right. So I might learn things outside of my job because that keeps me mentally sharp on the job. Right. For emotional strength, I've got a regular meditation practice, and I also do this sort of strategic regulation of my mood, right? So if I have to show up for a particular situation, I think about, well, what would be the right way to show up? Should I show up high energy, really positive emotion? Should I be a little bit more chill? Like using strategic regulation of my mood to show up the right way. And then physically, it's about, hey, move, like even if just 15 minutes, right? But it's all of the things, that you do, just, it's different for everybody, but it's having that practice. And just for a minute, if I could just reference all of where I would give credit on sort of all the work I did and where all these sort of principles lie. A lot of it comes from the Human Performance Institute. It's one area that I spent a lot of time with. The other is I did the free course that anyone can do from Yale. It's the Science of Wellness. And then I took a course through Coursera, like you have to pay for it, but it was worth it, from the University of Michigan called Meaning of Life. And then finally, like on this notion of that kind of creative leadership, I took a lot of inspiration from the book Scaling Leadership by Anderson and Adams. So that's a lot of work there, but those are the things that kind of got me to that realization of it's about my purpose, and then it's about all that energy, how you create it. And that's a much different way of operating as you think about before, where it's like, I'm here to achieve this track, do these things. It's a much more purposeful way of living, and it has downstream effects on everyone and everything in my life.
All right, so I want you to give an example of shifting your energy, because I think it's an important thing, like during work. So let's say you have a project budget being cut, you stayed up really late the night before, you're tired, your energy might be frustrated, low, exhausted. What would you do?
Yeah, so it's a great example. So the first thing is the emotional intelligence behind that, right? So I'll address the practices first so we don't show up tired, because that's one thing. If I know the budget meeting's coming, I'm not showing up tired.
Right.
But it's the understanding that labeling first that I'm frustrated. What does frustrated mean? It means that there's something in the way of me achieving my goal.
Right.
That's the definition.
Right.
So now that I know the definition, that's important. And the next step I would take in that process is say, okay, what am I doing, or what was I doing right before this moment that would feed into that? So now I think you just told me, well, I'm tired and I'm getting bad news, right? So now I know that. Will that serve me in the moment? Will that get me what I need? Probably not. So then what I would need to do is think about where I want to be. And I think for that conversation, I would want to have sort of a lower level of energy, but positive intention, because I want people to listen and I want to bring people along for the disagreement. Okay. So how might I make that transition? So I have a handful of things that I use. The first comes from tennis, and it's the reset point. It's 13 seconds and it's like 13 steps. One is you take a deep breath, you smile, you exhale, you take another breath, you shrug your shoulders, so on and so forth. You think of something you're grateful for. 13 seconds I can do it, right? But that may not be for everybody. Another example might be, do something funny, like look at a YouTube video, right? That might put me in a more kind of lighthearted. But there are strategies to get in the right quadrant, if you will. And I would point the listeners to a tool called the mood meter, which allows you to plot that process I just did. Say, okay, I'm high energy, really negative. I'm frustrated. Frustrated means this. And you can play around with them. It's an app to say, okay, where do I want to be? And it allows you to kind of be really strategic with it. And I found it to be a really useful tool. And then you incorporate those practices we talked about, right? Whether it's in the moment, deep breathing. But hopefully there are all of these other practices around getting sleep, around exercising, around learning, around meditation, that have you show up more at your best often than not. So you've got this bank full of good habits that allow that adjustment to be easier. You can't always do it. And so sometimes, and then you have to recognize, is my adjustment strategy a short-term thing, or is it a long-term practice that's going to help me for the long term?
Yeah. Love that. I love that there's an app to help. So that's great.
Yeah, there's an app for everything. Right?
Exactly. So what have you seen as far as like the changes you made with transitioning from the incremental changes to taking risks or being more transformative? How do you think it's affected people around you differently than before?
Yeah. So it's had a big impact. So I first say at work, I'll take first it's speed, right? And that's part of the design of all this is we got to go faster. And that, without getting into the actual details of what we measure, or whatever, that has increased. So the team has gotten really fast, and I can compare it to other teams I've worked with, things like that. So the speed is there, but also what's changed is a team now that's more comfortable with doing this type of inner work. The kind of mood meter I talked about, it's kind of a joke, people make fun of me, but I often will start a meeting with now my Zoom background, or in our case, it's Teams background, with the mood meter to say, okay, this is going to be a tough decision. Where is everybody? Where are we starting the meeting, right? So you use these tools, and the team understands that's what we're doing, right? And it's not just the understanding, is that people are doing that work, right? They're putting these practices in place. So that's a conversation and a group practice. So that's exciting to me.
Well, I actually think there's a third thing, and that is that you're showing by example too. Because a lot of times in organizations that I work with, it's like the leaders want like certain initiatives like this to go forward, but then they don't follow it, or they don't do it. And so then the team, doesn't buy into it or isn't going to do it, because then they see that the leader isn't taking it seriously.
And that is that's awesome. Great insight. It's the fundamental thing about transformation at scale begins with personal transformation, right? And so then it's all right, I got to be the first one to admit that, my approach, right, my go-to approach would be one that's based in playing not to lose. And what we're trying to do is help the industry win, right? And so, so that vulnerability, and it's also super freeing too, right? It's like, so that at the work site, at home, that's as meaningful, if not more, which it's about creating those moments of connectedness every day and making that a priority. And most importantly, not waiting for special occasions or the seesaw, what I used to do, which is I'm now focused on home. And I might take a day or a month or a quarter and say, everything's about home. And then work is like, where'd the sunshine go, right? And then if I go back to work, the sunshine's gone. And having that be more integrated and knowing that, again, it's incremental. I don't need to be one or the other. So as long as I have a practice to say, all right, I'm now going to show up my best self at home, that can be a quick, thing on the mood meter, and I can show up and we can have a great conversation at dinner. I might have been a little bit tired before, but being able to connect those moments like that and having the agility to do that has been good for me. But most importantly, in my home life, right? It's contagious. And the work I've done with emotional intelligence, I know that moods are contagious. So it's essential to be able to show up your best at the moment and quickly recover from things that don't have you in a place that serves, what you're trying to do. And it's just an obvious point, but it has a huge impact.
That's great. Awesome. So I like to do some rapid fire questions. So I'd like you to pick a category. So family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Okay. Let's pick health.
Okay, great. All right. So question 1, things or actions that I don't have that I want with my health.
So things that I don't have that I want is the ability to travel to see people that I miss. Social distancing. Everyone has that problem now, but when I think about that, I really miss people. I haven't seen some people all year, right? So that impacts my health. Makes me sad.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially with conferences.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
like usually our busy time, right?
Yeah.
So things or actions I do have that I want.
Yeah, so it's the things we talked about, the practices around physical movement, emotional well-being, the continuous learning, trying to keep my mind sharp and that clear understanding of what I'm trying to do. Those are things that are really good for me. I'm
Yeah.
glad I have them, and I'm glad I've done the work, and hope others will as well.
And things or actions I don't have that I don't want.
Fear of missing out, FOMO, from spending too much time on social media. I've learned that's not good for me.
Yeah, I went to Oprah's 2020 vision tour before we got shut down, but I bought it. It's a water bottle that says JOMO, joy of missing out. So,
I love it. Yeah. Yeah.
all right, last one. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want.
Age appropriate aches and pains. No longer 20,
I
right?
know, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, tennis feels a little different.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, is there anything you want to make sure before we close out our conversation today that people take away that we haven't covered?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me and thanks for listening. And I'd say that, the world's moving fast. And to keep up, I would submit that we have to live and work in different ways, more purposeful ways. And, today's problems really calls for leaders that will inspire the creative solutions that we've been talking about. And at the same time, we got to play a long game, a sustainable game. And physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual energy is absolutely key to all this.
Yes, awesome. So, thank you so much for being on and sharing. And there's lots of great tips for people to kind of learn from your journey and see what they can incorporate in their life.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And now for our mindful moments with this interview with Keith, where he offered so many little tidbits of exercises and ways that you can start shifting your own mindset by things that he has done in his own life. So we started talking about how he had a personal operating system of really moving incrementally because he wanted stability, he wanted continuity in his career. And when he stepped back from it, he really realized that those attributes were really based on fear. And in order to be an achiever, you needed ways that were stable, have been tried and tested in order to get the positive feedback that he was desiring. But in order to really move through transformation, we have to really think about how do we take those risks and not play it safe sometimes. And I think his observation during his 6-month break, where he took a break between jobs, was how he could get re-energized. That we all have those moments in our careers or work or things that we're doing where we might get stagnant, might be losing our energy around it. And how do we do the work that's needed ourselves in order to create that new way of thinking, that new way of re-energizing? And for him, it was really going back and researching transformation and understanding what actually creates transformation. And, he talked a lot about how important learning has been in his process from the time he was young to now in his career, of always going back and really researching what works, what doesn't work, what are some exercises and things that we can do personally in order to get over that next hump change. And doing that inner work is just so important. And for many of us, we can put excuses up of why we can't do the inner work, whether it's time or so forth. But when we really want to do something, we'll make the time. And carving out that time, whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes a day, or you take a sabbatical like he did, is important time for us to understand what our purpose is and how do we want to create that future. What does that even look like? And maybe we don't have all the details, the specs for it, but we understand that that future looks different and we may need different skill sets. And that could be personal skill sets, not necessarily something you get out of a certification or college in order to achieve it. So Keith shared some practices that really helped him with really shifting his energy and how he intentionally goes about that in his day, making sure that he's got that mental clarity, that emotional strength, and also that he's keeping up his physical wellness as well, because that becomes important in creating the energy that we want as well, so that we have the energy to show up the way that we want to. So some of the things that he talked about was first understanding what his purpose was and how does he actually get there? What things does he need to learn outside of the job that he does, whether that's books that you're reading, apps that you're using, seminars you attend, in order to create that mental strength, that mental clarity, in order to make those shifts internally. He also talked about meditation and how that's been an important area for him with his own inner work, to understand what is actually going on internally for him so that he can move into his mental regulation, right? Like, so if you're observing thoughts, feelings, low energy through meditation, you're going to shift how you actually interact with people so that you don't draw energy down with others as well. And for us to do that work, it has to be very intentional. It also has to be something that we dedicate time to doing. And really, this is something that he was talking about, doing it that day, each day, in order to make a practice of it so that he can make sure to create the energy that he wants. And one of the apps that he talked about, if you missed it, was Mood Meter. And that was an app that helped him understand, I've got low energy, I might be frustrated. So what do I need to do as a practice right now to shift my energy so that I show up in a way that's positive, that creates the energy that I want for a meeting or for even the relationships that we have around us. Really important to understand that if we want to create transformation in our organizations or transformation with the people around us, whether that be personal or in our work life, that we have to make these changes personally first in order for people to take that seriously, to know that we really mean it, to know that we care when we're saying these things matter to us, and so forth. So think about if there are little things that you want to be doing in your own life or in your business life, of changes that you want to make, and how you can go about actually doing it yourself, start being the example for those around you, so that you're not only better for yourself, but you create the energy that you want for the people around you as well. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.